The sun scorched the cracked sidewalks of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where the air smelled of river mud and gasoline, thick enough to chew. Roy stood under a wilting oak tree across from the governor's mansion visitor center, his denim jacket stiff with grime, the collar of his shirt frayed like it had been clawed by time itself. He hadn't said a word all morning, not to the church volunteers passing out bologna sandwiches wrapped in cling film, not to the jogger who sidestepped him with a quick glance, not even to the old man who tossed a quarter at his feet, muttering something about Jesus. Roy just stood there, his skin baked by the heat, his boots so worn the soles flapped with every step. He looked like he'd been wandering for years without a map. And maybe he had. His name was Roy. At least that's what it used to be, when people still bothered to ask. Now he was just, hey, man, or move it, or the guy nobody looked in the eye. The pavement shimmered, the humidity wrapping around him like a second skin, and his stomach growled. A hollow ache that hadn't let up since the gas station clerk slipped him a stale taquito the night before. Roy didn't care much for crowds. But today one had gathered reporters with microphones, locals with folding chairs, a few kids on bikes weaving through the chaos. They were all waiting for someone. Necks craned, phones out, buzzing about a name Roy didn't recognize. John Kennedy, the senator with a drawl that could charm a snake. Roy didn't follow politics. He didn't have a radio or a television, just the street and the stories it told. But he overheard a woman in a sun hat say, "That's John. He talks like one of us." And something about that stuck with him. He watched from across the street, squinting through the haze. Kennedy wasn't what Roy expected, no swarm of bodyguards. Just a couple of aides trailing behind, a navy suit that looked crisp despite the heat, and a grin that said he'd rather be fishing. The senator moved through the crowd, shaking hands, pausing to listen to a grandmother's complaint about potholes, nodding at a kid who asked for a selfie. Roy didn't know what a senator did exactly, but this guy seemed real, or at least real enough for Roy to notice. His throat was dry, his lips cracked, and the hunger was starting to make his head fuzzy. He'd asked for help before most times. People didn't even slow down, their eyes sliding past him like he was part of the scenery. But something about Kennedy, the way he leaned in when people talked, made Roy think maybe this time could be different. He stepped off the curb, his boots dragging, each step heavier than it should have been. The crowd noticed him coming, whispers rippling like a stone dropped in water. A man in a polo shirt shifted to the side, nose wrinkling. Like Roy smelled badan, maybe he did, but that wasn't why he was walking. A reporter adjusted her camera, zooming in, sensing something was about to happen. Roy stopped about 6 feet from Kennedy, close enough to be heard, far enough not to spook anyone. The senator turned, his eyes locking onto Roy's. Not with pity or annoyance, but with a kind of curiosity that made Roy's chest tighten. He cleared his throat, the sound raspy, barely cutting through the hum of the crowd. "Sir," Roy said, his voice low, "can you give me $1?" The words hung there, simple, raw, and everything went still. The volunteers froze, sandwiches halfway handed out. An aide stepped forward, hand hovering like he was ready to intervene. A kid on a bike stopped pedaling, his sneakers scraping the pavement. The reporter's camera swung toward them, the lens glinting in the sun. People braced for something a brush-off, a polite smile, maybe a lecture about shelters. But Kennedy didn't move. He just looked at Roy. Not past him, not through him, but at him. And there was something in that silence, not tense, but heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Roy didn't blink. He wasn't begging, wasn't threatening, just standing there, tired, beaten down by life and heat and years of being invisible. Kennedy tilted his head, his drawl slow and deliberate. "What's your name, son?" The question hit Roy like a punch he didn't see coming. Nobody asked his name anymore. Not the cops who shooed him from doorways, not the shopkeepers who watched him like a thief. "Roy," he said, his voice cracking, surprised he even answered. Kennedy nodded, like he was filing it away. "All right, Roy. I'm John." The crowd didn't know what to make of it. A reporter lowered her mic, her eyebrows raised. The aide stepped back, unsure. Roy, for the first time in longer than he could remember, didn't feel like a problem to be swept away. Kennedy's eyes didn't waver. "You hungry, Roy?" Roy blinked, the question slicing through the fog in his head. Hungry didn't even cover either's stomach was a knot, his last meal a memory. "Yeah," he said, almost a whisper. "Ain't eaten since yesterday." Kennedy turned to his aide, a young guy in a polo named Travis. "Travis, run across the street. Get Roy something hot. Not just a burger, something with meat. Vegetables." "The works." Travis hesitated, glancing at Roy, then nodded and jogged off toward a diner. Roy stood there, stunned, trying to process what was happening. The crowd was still watching, some pretending not to, others openly staring. He hated being the center of attention, especially looking like this, hair matted, jeans torn, smelling like the street. But Kennedy didn't seem to care about the optics. He gestured to a bench nearby. "You want to sit, Roy? Looks like you've been on your feet a while." Roy hesitated, then shuffled over, sitting on the edge, like he didn't quite belong there. Kennedy sat beside him, not too close, but close enough to show he wasn't afraid. The senator leaned back, elbows on his knees, like they were just two guys shooting the breeze. "Where you from, Roy?" Roy rubbed his hands together, nervous. "Baton Rouge, originally. Grew up near the river. Been moving around lately." Kennedy nodded, like that made sense. "What happened? You got family?" Roy's throat tightened. He didn't like talking about it. But Kennedy's tone wasn't pushy, just steady, like he really wanted to know. "Had a wife," Roy said, staring at the ground, "back in Lafayette. We lost our place after I got hurt. Bad knee. Couldn't work. She tried to keep us afloat, but it was too much. She left 3 years ago, maybe. Said she'd call when she got settled. Never did." Kennedy didn't say anything, just listened. His face calm but not blank, like he was taking it in. Roy kept going, surprised at himself. "I was a plumber. Good one too. Fixed pipes for schools, churches, you name it. Never thought I'd end up like this." Kennedy's voice was soft. "Life's got a way of throwing curves, don't it?" Roy nodded, his hands trembling slightly. "Yeah, curves." Travis came back, holding a styrofoam container and a bottle of water. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, still steaming. Kennedy took it and handed it to Roy himself. "Eat up, Roy. You need it." Roy's fingers shook as he opened the container, the smell hitting him like a wave. He tried to eat slowly, but his body didn't care about manners. The crowd was still there, some filming with their phones, others whispering. A reporter leaned in, her voice sharp. "Senator, is this your stance on homelessness in Louisiana?" Kennedy shook his head, his drawl firm. "This ain't about policy, ma'am. This is about being human." Roy froze, a forkful of potatoes halfway to his mouth. Not because of the words, but because Kennedy meant them. You could hear it. Feel it. The reporter pressed. "Do you think this kind of thing makes a difference?" Kennedy looked at Roy, then back at her. "Why don't you ask Roy?" All eyes turned to him. Roy wasn't used to being asked anything, let alone in front of cameras. He swallowed, his voice low. "Yeah, it makes a difference. Not the food well. That too, but him talking to me. Like I'm still a person." The crowd went quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like something's shifting. Kennedy leaned in, his voice low, so only Roy could hear. "You are a person, Roy. Don't let nobody tell you different." Roy looked at him, really looked, and for a moment, he didn't feel like the guy everybody crossed the street to avoid. But Kennedy wasn't done. He stood up, dusted off his slacks, and turned to Travis. "Call the motel on North Street, the clean one. Get Roy a room for the week. Bed, shower, the works." Roy's jaw dropped. "A room? For me?" Kennedy nodded, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Yeah, Roy. For you," the crowd murmured, some clapping, others just staring, like they couldn't believe it. Roy's eyes welled up, but he wiped them quick, not wanting to look weak. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Kennedy crouched down, eye level. "Because I seen folks like you before, Roy. Good folks who got dealt a bad hand. And I ain't about to walk away when I can do something." Roy didn't know what to say, so he just nodded, clutching the food container like it was all he had left. The senator stood, addressing the crowd now, his voice carrying that Louisiana lilt. "Y'all, this ain't about me. It's about seeing somebody who's hurting and doing what you can. Ain't nobody too big or too small for that." The crowd nodded, some teary, others thoughtful. Roy sat there, overwhelmed, the chicken growing cold in his hands. He didn't know it yet, but this was just the start. Kennedy's next move would shake him to his core. But before we go on, I want to take a moment to thank y'all for reading this story. It's stories like Roy's that remind us what humanity's all about, and I'm honored to share them with you. If this tale's touched your heart even a little, please consider supporting our channel with a small donation. Every dollar helps us keep bringing you real, raw stories of hope and kindness, stories that don't always make the headlines but change lives all the same. You can donate at the link in our bio, and even a buck makes a difference, just like it did for Roy. Thank you, and let's keep shining a light on what matters. Now, back to Roy. He looked at Kennedy, still trying to wrap his head around it all. A room. A whole week. He hadn't slept on a bed in years, hadn't had a door to lock or a shower that wasn't a gas station sink. "You don't have to do this," he mumbled, his voice thick. Kennedy grinned. That easy, lopsided grin. "Roy, my mama'd tan my hide if I didn't. Now eat your chicken." Roy managed a small laugh, the sound foreign to his own ears. The crowd was starting to thin, some heading back to their cars, others lingering, like they didn't want the moment to end. A kid, maybe 10, tugged at his mom's sleeve. "Is the senator giving him a house?" The mom hushed him, but Kennedy overheard, kneeling down to the boy's level. "Not a house, son, but a start. Everybody needs a start." The boy nodded, wide-eyed. And Roy felt something stir in him. Something he hadn't felt in years, maybe, or at least the ghost of it. He took another bite, slower this time, savoring the warmth. Kennedy sat back down, watching him eat, not in a hurry to move on. "You said you were a plumber," Kennedy said, picking up the thread. "What kind?" Roy swallowed, surprised the senator remembered. "Mostly commercial. Schools, offices. Fixed a lot of old pipes in the parish buildings around here." Kennedy raised an eyebrow. "That's hard work. You ever miss it?" Roy stared at the ground, the question digging